One observation I made a while ago is that the first species on this planet to believe in the supernatural, to believe in gods, was also the first species to attain truly godlike capabilities. Just think about it. We can manipulate our own genetics, we can leave this planet if we wanted to, and we can rain down utter destruction. So we're godlike in both our creative and destructive capacities. Is this a coincidence? Not at all. In fact, our godlike capacity originally developed when we as a species began to envision beings who were beyond us. That is what set us on the road to becoming godlike ourselves. We know this because the oldest megalithic site ever discovered is that of Göbekli Tepe, located in southern Turkey. And this impressive archaeological finding has forced scholars to change their models about the origins of human civilization. Based on excavations of the site, scholars have concluded that the area was used for some particular religious practice. But the really intriguing aspect of Göbekli Tepe is that no evidence of habitation has been found, and the area seems to have only been inhabited by hunter-gatherers. All previous models just kind of assumed that humans took up agriculture before they devoted any time to building megalithic structures. And we also assumed that humans would first build living settlements and then things like religious buildings. But Göbekli Tepe seems to indicate that the opposite is the case, or as the lead investigator of the site Klaus Schmidt put it, first came the temple, then the city. It seems that belief in supernatural entities was in some way involved with humans transitioning from hunting and gathering in relatively small bands to a more sedentary lifestyle which progressively involved more and more people. The origin of cities has something to do with the supernatural. We separated ourselves from nature because of the influence of divine entities. Or that's how it appears if you were to study the historical record. The fact that we began to live in enormous cities and complex societies has its roots in the fact that we were more willing to believe in divine entities. If we compare humans with most other animals, one key and obvious difference is that humans are willing to believe in invisible, intangible gods, which can't be directly observed. But what is it about these reverential entities that enables such a significant change in human behavior? To answer this question, we will need to examine primate sociology at the most basic level, because here is where we'll be able to uncover the archetypal roots of the idea of God. Humans are primates, and we are members of the family known as the great apes, which also includes chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Nearly all primate species are social, living in bands ranging from as few as 6 individuals to as many as 80 depending on the species. The social structure of these groups can be very complex, and not all species have the same structure. But one of the most important ways in which groups organize themselves is according to dominance. The primatologist James J. McKenna defines dominance in the following way. Dominance refers to the relative status or social rank of an animal as determined by its ability to compete successfully for goals with others. Such contested goals might include attempts to gain access to physical resources, such as preferred food items, or favorite sleeping or resting sites. So each animal in the group has a rank which reflects its dominance over the other members of the group. Between any two animals, one is going to be subordinate and the other is dominant. And each member of the group has his or her place in the hierarchy. In the vast majority of primates, males are dominant over females, although there are some exceptions such as bonobos and some species of lemurs. At the top of the hierarchy are the alpha male and alpha female. Animals can gain in rank by challenging more dominant individuals or by forming coalitions with other members in order to try and overthrow higher ranking members. Being the alpha male comes with the benefit of having preferential access to resources and mating opportunities, whereas the subordinates are often denied these privileges. Or as the primatologist Suraj B. Datta explains, monkeys often have clearly defined dominance relations with others in their social group. The dominant pair is regularly able to boss the subordinate, displacing it from food, drink, and other objects of competition or common attraction. This asymmetry in the relationship can be profoundly disadvantageous for the subordinate. Not only is its access to resources restricted, but it may experience physiological stress and may produce, raise, or even conceive fewer offspring. Although this paints the picture of alpha males being these tyrannical bullies, the reality is much more complicated, and dominant individuals who act mean and aggressively towards group members are at great risk of losing their position. As McKenna explains, gaining social support from group members, allies, due to an ingratiating personality or temperament can also permit an animal to rise in rank above a cranky, nasty counterpart who is strong but unable to solicit appropriate social support. So just like politicians, dominant primates need to secure their position by forming alliances with others and demonstrating their effectiveness as leaders. They do this by helping to resolve conflicts within the group and by providing a sense of security. One primatologist, Karen B. Stryer, explains the political life of primates in the following way. In primates with rigid hierarchies, like baboons or chimpanzees, a male's position in the pecking order and his access to mates can be partially dependent on his ability to maintain coalitionary support through mutual assistance and affiliative interactions with other males. For this reason, subordinates often look up to the alpha male and admire him greatly, and effective alpha males are very often popular with the younger members of the group. This also increases social unity amongst group members, making the troop more resilient to external threats, such as challenges from neighboring primate groups. So one thing that's really crucial to understand for our purposes is to note the interactions between a dominant and a subordinate individual. Primates use a variety of communication signals to signify their place in the dominance hierarchy. Dominant animals usually retain eye contact for longer than submissive animals, who usually avert their gaze from dominant animals as a sign of appeasement. Eye contact is very important in primate communication, and you may have even noticed that amongst people, shyer people tend to avert their gaze and avoid eye contact more. When confronted by dominant animals, subordinate primates need to change their behavior in order to prevent the dominant primate from being aggressive. McKenna discusses other behaviors which are used to signal submissiveness in relation to dominance. Dominance is attributed to individuals who evoke what is termed submissive or appeasement gesture, such as the presentation of the hindquarters or vocalizing and grimacing in fear by the subordinate animal. So in the presence of the alpha male, the subordinates need to act in a submissive manner, putting on a kind of social mask in order to appease the alpha. This relates back to eye contact because submissive animals are very sensitive to the gaze of dominant individuals, because knowing that they're being watched by the dominant individual causes them to behave much more passively and act in a way which is meant to prevent evoking anger in the dominant individual. In other words, they behave more passively, whereas the dominant individual is more or less just free to act like they would normally act. This is equivalent to the father archetype in depth psychology. It is an inborn desire to follow a leader and be passive in their presence and, follow their commands. To see them as a kind of template on which you should base your own behavior. And that's generally how the younger primates in a troop see the alpha male. They look up to them as these models that they're supposed to imitate, which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Because again, if the alpha male is in that position, he's probably doing something to be in that position. And so it makes sense from your perspective to imitate him. So you can probably start to recognize the evolutionary origins of this archetype. The alpha male and female's control over the group is what allows the group to stay together and not fight amongst each other. They essentially keep group members in check by monitoring their activities. However, the position of alpha is never really stable, as each animal usually aspires to be in that position, and this leads to a high rate of turnover. Furthermore, as the population of a group increases, the group becomes more unstable and susceptible to fracturing and infighting, which is why group sizes amongst primates rarely exceed a certain number. As McKenna writes, part of the problem here seems to be that as group size increases, individuals do not have the time available to interact with all members of their group, or even to observe them interacting with individuals that they themselves interact regularly with. So as the group size increases, the alpha can't force every animal to be submissive because he can only dedicate his time to a few individuals at any given time. And he needs to be in direct contact with them in order to assert his authority. When they're not in his presence, the submissives can act in a way that is contrary to his intentions and authority. And this allows subordinate males to engage in active behavior, such as mating with females, and they can do so as long as they're not in the presence of the alpha male. The important thing to note about this is that the subordinates know when they are being watched by the alpha, so they know when or when not to engage in inappropriate behavior. Now, I've discussed before that this is actually a very important feature of getting groups to work, getting social animals to act as if they have almost like one mind. One of the most important functions of a group is protection from predators, as having more eyes in your band allows the group to more easily spot threats. The evolutionary purpose of dominance, or at least one evolutionary purpose, is that it allows the group to act in a more cohesive manner. Because think about it, if each individual went about their business without considering the positions and activities of other group members, it may leave them vulnerable to predators. Hence, the social function of the dominant individual is to make decisions on behalf of the group, mostly about the movements of the group, so that the group can remain as a cohesive unit. So you might be asking at this point, what does this have to do with the psychology of gods? The origin of gods is directly related to the fact that humans evolved the genes needed for abstract thinking, allowing them to consider and reflect upon things which weren't immediately present in the environment. This may sound trivial, but it's actually a revolutionary development, and one that enabled the cognitive revolution. The ability to imagine something that isn't directly in your field of perception means that you're capable of hallucinating. Hallucinations are features of your mental life that aren't present in the environment per se, and in actuality, humans hallucinate all the time. Your consciousness is actually a kind of hallucination. Your inner monologue, for example, is a voice that you're hearing. It's not something out there, it's something that you're experiencing internally, something that's being generated by your mind. But like I said, this is a revolutionary development in the history of psychology, because it specifically becomes possible to hallucinate the existence of other beings. And if these other beings just happen to be higher than you on the dominance hierarchy, it would cause you to act passively in their presence. So now, the idea of the alpha male can be carried around, and it always exists as this hallucinatory presence. And that is exactly what a god is in the earliest civilizations. A god is a supreme being that is constantly watching over your shoulders. Its eyes are constantly fixed on you, and so you would always have to behave in a submissive manner at all times. The consequences of this are immensely profound, and we can look at one example to see why. Believe it or not, the earliest city-states of Mesopotamia weren't ruled by people, but were ruled by hallucinatory gods, and the people were all subjects of the gods. These gods were often statues located in temples which were regularly visited by the people, but they only really existed in the minds of these people. The temples thus become the centers of social control, and the highest ranking members of the dominance hierarchy were actually supernatural entities, believed to inhabit these temples and issue orders from them. People visited these temples to offer worship to the god and look up at them in reverence, in a similar way that alpha male primates are looked up to and revered. Eridu was one early city in Mesopotamia. The god Enki was the chief god of the city and was considered to actually be the founder of the city. I mean, what does that even mean? How could a god found a city? Well, if Enki was a real person who later became deified, it makes a lot more sense. But Enki afterwards would have been a hallucination, a hallucinatory being who exerted control over the city of Eridu. He was the alpha male in a sense, but because he wasn't an actual person, but a hallucination, he exerted his control over the entire populace. And no matter where any person went, they would always be followed by Enki, and thus forced to behave in a more passive manner. So in this sense, people could carry around their alpha males, or even alpha females, because we see many examples of female deities, who again are also higher up in the dominance hierarchy, despite being merely a hallucination. Because it's very clear from the historical records that people believed that the gods were the rulers of their cities. And people believed that these gods were speaking to them, and that only seems possible if they were experiencing hallucinations. So you can see how hallucinations were actually a revolutionary step in the evolution of life. We've discussed how primates need to behave submissively in the presence of the dominant individual, but can behave less submissively if the dominant individual is absent. In the case of hallucinatory gods, the individual feels as if they are always present as auditory hallucinations. In other words, it feels as though these gods are always watching the person. And this causes the person's behavior to be more passive, and their behavior is more easily controlled. So this enables those advantages of the dominance hierarchy that we discussed before, but you don't actually need that dominant individual to interact with every member of the group. From the person's perspective, the gods are always with them, telling them what to do. And it feels to them as though they are always being watched. In a very real sense, humankind was domesticated by the gods. We were the first domesticated species, and it happened when we abandoned our natural instincts and started having hallucinations. Hallucinatory gods obviously differ from alpha males in that their control over the group is relatively stable. Unlike high-ranking dominant individuals, gods can't simply be challenged and replaced. I mean, I guess I can, but it's a much more sophisticated process. This is part of the reason why human groups are able to attain such a large size, as the splintering which occurs in other primate groups due to competition for the top spot doesn't occur as easily. I mean, how can a person displace an immortal god? The alpha male in a troop can die and be replaced, but the gods are immortalized in a sense by temples, statues, and religious symbolism, and so their rule over the people is relatively stable. From this position as hallucinatory presences, pacifying the behavior of the subjects, the gods can allow human groups to achieve huge sizes as compared to other primates, because there is no competition for the top spot, and every single person feels themselves to be under the dominion of these higher beings. This is how cities became enormous, and how humans were able to cooperate on an unprecedented scale. because otherwise, the lack of authoritative control exerted by the non-metaphysical alpha male would lead to splintering and chaos. Gods pacified humans, and in a sense, we were enslaved by them. And this is what caused us to become godlike. It's kind of this paradox where being enslaved by these higher beings allowed us to become like those higher beings. And that's how we were able to go beyond our evolutionary limits. I mean, even you at the individual level, if you want to accomplish some impressive feat, you need to enslave yourself, so to speak, so that you can transcend your normal limitations and do something extraordinary. We still have that very reverential mindset for beings we consider to be higher than ourselves, which is why we deify celebrities and, athletes. Because a professional athlete seems to be achieving this extraordinary feat of physical exertion, and so our minds still see them as godlike. But we only ever became godlike because of these original gods who were hallucinatory presences, who in a sense guided humanity towards this path. So it seems that our ability to hallucinate and have imaginations about things which aren't tangible allowed human culture to become increasingly sophisticated. And it is one of the things which makes our species unique. And it's important to note that these gods aren't simply authoritarian rulers over the people. The people worship the gods and revere them as sources of comfort and social unity, just like effective alpha males in primate societies. In a sense, the gods are tapping into our archetypal psychology in order to increase social control. In later societies, kings would return to rule the people in a form of government known as a theocracy. In this system, the gods are still technically the highest ranking entities, and the kings were their representatives on Earth. So really, the king was in charge, but from his perspective, he was just acting under the obedience of a higher god. Later in history, gods would go on to evolve significantly and take on different roles, such as personifying aspects of nature, standing for abstract concepts, or presiding over moral judgments. The significance of gods and religion in the cognitive development of our species can be hardly overstated. Gods aren't the only reason our species has been able to achieve this level of intelligence, but they are an important factor in this development. As Julian Jaynes wrote, "The overwhelming importance of religion, both in general world history and in the history of the average world individual, is of course very clear from any objective standpoint, even though a scientific view of man often seems embarrassed at acknowledging this most obvious fact. For in spite of all that rationalist materialist science has implied since the scientific revolution, mankind as a whole does not, and perhaps cannot, relinquish his fascination with some human type of relationship to a greater and holy other, some mysterium tremendum, something necessarily indefinite and unclear, to be approached and felt in awe and wonder." If you want to discuss this topic further with me, you can do so by joining us on Patreon and getting access to my Discord server. And there you'll be able to get access to a couple of my books in my library, including Julian Jaynes' book about the bicameral mind, and another fascinating book about how gods in civilization spoke to humankind. But anyways, thanks for watching, have a good day, and may good luck always come your way.